Good morning, Mr. Schnellenbach. Gas prices have recently reached an absolutely enormous level. Converted to American standards, we have now reached over $8 per gallon. In America, even half of that causes a huge stir. What have you changed about your private behavior so far?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Geiseley. Yes, to be honest, I haven't changed my private behavior that much when it comes to driving. So I still drive just as much as before, and to be honest, still just as fast as before. So nothing has changed there because I'm in the comfortable situation, of course, that relative to my income, gas prices don't matter that much now. The spending on gasoline, and in that respect, it hasn't affected me very much so far.
Yes. At the same time, gas prices are at a record level, and that's already in a situation where purchasing power was significantly weakened just a few short years ago by the high inflation rates. So what do we do about that now?
Well, the problem is that we probably actually have a risk of stagflation, like in the 1970s, the challenging economic situation with significantly higher inflation rates that we are seeing today, which will certainly continue to rise now, and simultaneous stagnation. And if the ECB reacts with interest rate hikes, then we naturally also have a real risk of recession. That means a difficult macroeconomic situation could be coming our way. That's one side of it. And the other side is that, of course, politicians are trying now to push down gas prices, after all, with such selective interventions. But this particular attempt to introduce this 12 o'clock rule, the high noon, obviously did not seem to work out very well at all in Germany, which is a bit surprising because it actually worked out quite well in Austria just a few years ago, and it didn't work for us. And it's a bit of a puzzle why that's the case. No one can really explain it yet. But yeah, in any case, that didn't work, and now we'll have to see which measures come next.
The 12 o'clock rule should perhaps be explained. It's the principle that the price at a gas station may only be adjusted once a day, namely exactly at noon, because it used to go up and down very frequently. As you already said, it didn't work. But what does work then? What can we do?
Well, what would obviously work, of course, is a reduction of the relevant taxes. So, if I were to significantly reduce the current petroleum tax, or also lower the standard value added tax rates on gasoline for consumers at the pump, then I'd get an immediate effect. How big that is remains to be seen, because if we have market power, providers would use this leeway to raise prices again. So, how much actually reaches the consumer is still an open question. And it's not necessarily a given that the entire tax cut would really reach the consumer. In that respect, this is also a problematic approach. And it is also highly problematic and concerning, I think, because the economic incentives that would be needed now in a real gas shortage to save gas are then completely undermined and thwarted by these actions. And then we run into situations where, in the end, some kind of rationing measures will likely come. Then we'll have car free Sundays again, or speed limits. Attempts to use regulation to get gas consumption down because this real gas shortage just isn't going away. And nobody wants to see long lines at gas stations with artificially low gas prices either. That rationing happens by suddenly having us all stand at the gas station for half an hour or an hour just to somehow get the scarce gasoline. Nobody wants that either. So it's better to ration through prices.
Rationing through prices. There is also a significant amount of discussion suggesting that these excess profits, as they like to say, should quite literally and directly be taxed away. This would mean that the additional profits oil companies are making now could be collected by the state through a much higher tax or a specific special tax, which would then redistribute that generated revenue back to the consumers. Do you believe that this approach could serve as a viable solution?
No, what we know from economic theory is that a windfall tax has no behavioral effects. That means if I tax away part of the excess profit, the company still maximizes the rest. of the profit that the company can still keep. This means that corporate behavior is not influenced by a windfall tax. So that does absolutely nothing for the consumers. The only thing that happens is that part of the higher profits is transferred to the state budget. When you first look at it, the process of organizing this transfer definitely has its own unique charm, but you have to be careful. From the perspective of economic theory, such a windfall tax is actually remarkably efficient and highly sensible because it doesn't involve any significant behavioral adjustments. In practice, it's almost impossible to clearly define excess profit. We're always poking around in the dark, using relatively crude rules of thumb that don't really match what pure theory would suggest. And then a windfall tax like that often ends up being distorting and problematic, and leads, for example, to the possibility that supply could be restricted. And we don't want that either, for the supply to be artificially restricted again, because companies, they lack any real financial incentive to successfully generate higher profits by efficiently coordinating a corresponding supply. So we don't really want to get involved in such side effects. And we also don't want to get involved in sending the wrong signals to other markets as well. So if I introduce something like that once in a market where I might still find it rather unproblematic in terms of behavioral incentives, then there's always the danger that it'll set a precedent, and that will soon have an excess profits tax on all sorts of other markets, and a bad one poorly executed. And then that has catastrophic behavioral incentives. Than it has on entrepreneurship, on groundbreaking innovation, and on all of that, which then leads to temporarily higher profits. It has absolutely disastrous sets of incentives. We don't really want that. We're destroying a lot of dynamics in the market economy if we use such a mechanism.
At the same time, it's already the case that the extra burden on consumers is there. Firstly, and secondly, it's also the case that not only the corporations might benefit, but especially the state coffers, particularly in Germany, where a significant part of the final consumer price flows to the state in the form of taxes in the end. Isn't it actually appropriate then to return this extra revenue in a specific format that then perhaps actually does not end up sending out bad price signals? For example, by offering financial relief for everyone, let's say through a flat rate suspension of value added tax. It's a situation where people still try to cut back as much as they possibly can whenever they are out driving, but are still relieved at the same time.
Hmm. Well, it is certainly true that the state is seeing much higher revenues right now, at least temporarily. And if we were to decide to lower the value added tax or VAT across the board at this particular moment, then there are these proposals. We could now lower the value added tax, for example, on applying basic necessity goods to the zero tax rate. At a preliminary glance, that has distributional effects. However, at second glance, these distributional effects are very imprecise because I'm also relieving people for those individuals who happen to earn a significantly higher annual income. Now, if we think about that for a moment, so what we actually see quite remarkably and relatively clearly there is that it makes sense if I want to achieve distribution. The way to achieve that is through specifically targeted financial transfers. Hmm. Specifically to the people who actually have a very low income. But redistributing via value added tax ultimately only means that I distort prices even more. Because then I'm applying the zero tax rate to certain goods and leaving the remaining ones exactly as they currently are. Because they're detrimental to your health or whatever, I'll keep the elevated rate of taxation there. I'm distorting prices more and more, interfering more and more with the price mechanism, and that's fundamentally inefficient. So, if I want to redistribute, one could certainly imagine trying to somehow redistribute this extra revenue back to the citizens. Well, then maybe one suggestion would be that since the end of 2025, we've basically had this climate money payout mechanism. Back then, under Christian Lender, the finance ministry was still a bit stubbornly, or rather headstrongly, pushing this project forward, further developing this payout mechanism. And it's working now. In principle, it would be possible to simply pay flat rate transfers to every household, or even to specific groups of low income households.
Yeah.
And if we want to redistribute, then it's best to do it this way and simply pay transfer payments to the groups of households we want to support. And that's the efficient way. But redistributing through the price mechanism via sales tax, that's nonsense.
Okay. That would be something similar to consumption vouchers, wouldn't it? So, well, aside from that,
I didn't quite catch that.
something similar to what was discussed before under the heading of consumption vouchers, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
yes, exactly. Something like that.
And what about a speed limit? I mean, your colleague Veronica Grimm, who's sort of the ordo liberal conscience on the Council of Economic Experts, says, okay, that would be at least a signal to the citizens like, people take this seriously. And at the same time, it doesn't have all the problematic effects of all the tax measures. Would that be an idea? Americans can do it too, 55 miles per hour.
Well, I mean, people are already taking it seriously. People see the gas prices after all, and those with lower incomes then adjust their driving behavior accordingly. So people do take the price signal seriously. And I don't think households really need a symbolic signal that this crisis is somehow to be taken particularly seriously. They already see it. They already see it. And I mean, the calculations that exist on how much gas is actually saved by such a speed limit, that's also minimal. So the real effect of the speed limit on gas consumption is really small because even now, only a few people really race across the highway at 200 and consume a lot. And most people already drive relatively carefully and slowly. And there's just not that much additional savings potential realistically left there. And that's why I don't understand the proposal. Well, as much as I usually tend to agree with Miss Grimm, that proposal, I couldn't really follow that one. Okay.